The Treaty Authority Bill this week passed in the lower house of the Victorian Parliament. The legislation is being touted as ensuring a fair and just reconciliation process for First Nations peoples. And if you needed any more proof that the Victorian Liberal Party was just as anemic in opposition as you feared, well, they helped Labor pass the bill, which will now go to the upper house. Thankfully, there was at least one voice of dissent who called this out for what it is, virtue signalling that does nothing to close the gap and better the lives of Indigenous Australians. Tim Smith, the member for Kew, joins us now. Tim, great to see you. How are you?
Rowan, I'm very well, mate. How are you?
Yeah, good, thanks.
Happy Sunday.
And to you, and thanks for being with us on Outsiders. So you stood up, you said you would not support this, and yet the Liberal Party supports it, the Nationals, who clearly seem to be in the thrall of this bloke Peter Walsh, who's also doubles up as the Indigenous spokesperson. You spoke out very firmly against this. Tell Outsiders and Australia why.
Well, very bluntly, 49.1% of Victorians were, at the last census, either born overseas or have a parent that was born overseas. How on earth is it fair that they are held responsible for the massacres that did occur in the Port Phillip district of the colony of New South Wales 190 years ago? That's patently ridiculous. I might also add, you can't make a treaty with your own citizens. And this is the point that I'm probably most passionate about. The road to citizenship for Aboriginal Australians was long and tortuous, and we got there 50 years ago. Now, for Aboriginals to be citizens of this country, and the fundamental principle of a liberal democracy is that everyone, no matter their race, is treated equally. Now, what this will end up doing, I suspect, is paying reparations to Australian citizens of Indigenous heritage. Well, essentially, we're now going to be treating Australians differently, in Victoria at least, by their race. Exactly. So we're regressing as a nation. Now, this is fundamentally wrong. And the other point that no one raised in the debate in Parliament this week, and I felt that I had to say it, and say it many times, is that I'm actually proud of our country. It's not without fault. And yes, bad things did happen, but our country's far more good than bad. We've been a force for good in the world for well over a century. And I tell you what, this country would be very, very different if another European naval power in the late 18th century settled it. I just wonder what sort of rights Indigenous Australians would have had this continent been settled by the Spanish in particular, or the French. I think we might find our histories would be very, very different, remembering that Arthur Phillip's instructions from the British government was to treat the Indigenous inhabitants of this land with respect and to treat them equally under the law, that Aboriginal Australians from the 26th of January 1788 were protected by what is known as the King's Peace, i.e. the common law, and that if you harmed an Indigenous Australian, that was exactly the same as harming a white Englishman. And can I say, in the late 18th century, that was a particularly revolutionary idea. And in Arthur Phillip's memorandum he wrote to Lord Sydney, the then Home Secretary, after he appointed him Governor of New South Wales, Phillip said that there will be no slavery in a free land.
But Tim,
people don't know this because they're never taught it.
Exactly.
Sure. Tim, I want to just jump in there. I mean, I would take minor issue with one thing you said. I think that, not only do the 41% of Australians who have roots overseas not bear responsibility for massacres in Port Phillip. So do everybody else, because the only people responsible for those massacres are the people who committed them. That said, I want to ask about this treaty bill, because one thing that leapt out at me from the reporting is that I think it said something like $64 million would be allocated to this over the first 4-year term of the body that would negotiate this treaty, and that this could be done for 8, 10, 12 years. How is this not just an incredibly irresponsible use of money that's going to go towards some very politicized process that then there will not be any impetus to come to a resolution, because so many people are going to get on this gravy train?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a great point. $20 million a year will be appropriated for this body from financial year 25-26. I think next year it's getting $14 million and it ramps up to 20, and from there on $20 million every single year. And you'd have to think that there's going to be a ginormous bureaucracy created, as there always is in Victoria, where, again, divisive, woke rewriting, as it were, of Australian history will occur. And this is occurring in the government, it's occurring in our schools, it's occurring all across society. And it's been going on for decades, where we are all being taught that the presence of white people on this continent is fundamentally wrong. And I made this point in my speech. That phrase that always was, always will be Aboriginal land and this land was never ceded, I personally find offensive. This country belongs to all of us, black and white alike. And I am sick to death of being told that this country, that I don't have any right to be here. Essentially, that phrase is a very polite, woke way of saying, how about the rest of you get back on a boat and go back to where you came from?
Yes, it is. Rita.
Well, for very good reasons, there's one would oppose this treaty, ideological reasons, practical reasons, but the Liberal Party, National Party, the coalition, all voted for it. They back this 100%. This is not something you can blame on the radically left Dan Andrews government. So what is happening with the Victorian Liberal Party, and why should anybody who is centre-right, conservative, support this lot?
Well, it's of grave concern to me, Rita, and that's why for the first time in 8 years I crossed the floor. I think in this instance the Liberal Party was led by the National Party. The leader of the National Party in Victoria is the Shadow Minister for Aboriginal Affairs. Now, I spoke to Jacinta Price before I decided to cross the floor. I think Jacinta Price is an absolute legend, and I'm so happy she's been elected to the Senate. Now, in Canberra, she's been elected as a member of the CLP. In Canberra, the CLP sits in the National Party room. So essentially in Canberra, Jacinta Price is a nat. So I just wonder how you can have someone in Canberra in the National Party who is so sensible on issues of reconciliation, and in Victoria, the leader of the National Party, well, the National Party actually don't even have party status in Victoria, let's be frank, frankly has no idea what he's talking about with regards to Australian history. And that led the Liberal Party down this terrible path. And
but don't
I'm
give the
gravely
Liberal Party a
concerned,
because at the end of the day, the Liberal Party...
let me just, can I finish?
Yeah.
Let me just finish, because what I'm gravely concerned about, going to your original point, Rita, is that there are now so many parties cropping up on our right, the Liberal Democrats, One Nation, this new Victorians party, who are espousing values that are very consistent with what I thought were the mainstream views of the Liberal Party. The Liberal Party is going to be very careful that it doesn't hemorrhage votes massively to our right. And
well, you've got a new...
something that I would encourage my party's leadership to take these warnings very seriously.
Hear, hear. Tim Smith, we've got to leave it there because we've got to get cracking on. You've got a Victorian senator from the UAP now in the federal parliament, Ralph Babet. Thanks so much, Tim Smith.